Serene, spiritual, magical, mythical, extraordinary, breathtaking, immense, inspiring, impressive. These are only some of the words people often use in an effort to describe the beautiful wonder that is the Meteora monasteries, located in the region of Trilaka in Thessaly, Greece, overlooking the quaint little red-roofed town called Kalambaka. Even if your interests are not deeply religious, the experience of visiting these monasteries can enrich your feelings of spirituality that this region exudes, and it is well worth the visit for historical value and for the appreciation of the art and architecture that went into creating such a serene, mythical retreat. The first people to use the cliffs of Meteora for spiritual reasons were the Greek Orthodox Christian hermit monks. They came to this region between the 9th and 10th century to find peace and quiet and to isolate themselves in the many caves scattered among the cliffs. For centuries, these monks lived in complete isolation. Exposed to weather and all sorts of environmental elements, they relied heavily on the help of the locals to survive. They regularly received donations of food, water, clothing, wood, and essentials. The locals saw them as holy men who came to dwell in the area and were worthy of their support. This early period is the first stage in the monastic development of Meteora, dominated by the ascetic figures of the first hermit monks, living unorganized and in isolation in the caves. This first stage lasted for a couple of centuries up until the 12th century, which began the second stage of development of Meteora's monastic traditions. Around the 12th century, a monk named Nilos decided to gather the scattered hermit monks of Meteora into a more organized monastic community. He set up rules and canons for the hermit monks of Meteora to follow, thus initiating the second phase of a more organized monastic development. The focal point of this community became the chapel of Dupiani, which still today is standing beneath the synonymous cliff on the northwest side of Kostraki village. The hermit monks of Meteora gathered every Sunday in the chapel of Dupiani to attend the Sunday service and to share provisions. 2 centuries later, in the 14th century, another monk named Athanasios climbed on the second highest rock to establish the first of the Meteora monasteries, the Great Meteoron. He is regarded today as one of the most important figures in the long history of Meteora monasteries, being the founder of one of the most important monastic communities of the Orthodox Church, second only to Athos. By the 16th century, the number of monasteries at Meteora had reached a total of 24. The 16th century was by far the best period of Meteora monasteries. During that time, the largest population of monks and the biggest number of monasteries were active. A century later, in the 17th century, the downfall was coming, and for the next 3 centuries, Meteora monasteries continually declined. Today, out of the initial 24 monasteries, only 6 survive and remain active. The Holy Monastery of Varlaam is the second largest monastery in the region of Meteora and is located very close to the largest one, which is called the Great Meteoron. The Holy Monastery of Varlaam owes its name to the Catholic Herman anchorite monk named Varlaam, a very daring ascetic who first ascended and inhabited this rock in the mid-14th century. Varlaam was then followed by a few other monks with whom he was able to establish this monastery. After Varlaam ascended to the top of this rock cliff, wooden ladders, each with about 25 rungs, were placed to assist the other monks to follow him. 4 or 5 ladders were added with about 95 rungs at maximum. The ladders were hanging from the rock with the help of pegs, with a gap created between each ladder. The monks often had to jump from one ladder to the next, risking their lives to make the ascension. This difficulty was due to the peculiarity and the morphology of this rock. Together, Varlaam and his fellow monks built 3 churches, a small living cell, and a water tank. After Varlaam's death, decades later, the cliff was abandoned by the rest of the monks. The site remained abandoned for about 200 years. The 14th century chapel built by Varlaam that had been dedicated to the 3 hierarchs nearly turned to ruins after the monastery was abandoned. In the early 16th century, around the years 1517 to 1518, 2 rich brothers from Ionia named Theophanes and Nectarios Apsaras reached the summit of the rock and decided to reactivate the abandoned monastery of Varlaam. The Apsaras brothers were descendants from the Old Continent Byzantine family and are celebrated today as the 2 founders of the monastery of Varlaam, even though their name did not eclipse the original monk who inhabited this rock. They settled on the cliff and spent many years renovating the ruins of Varlaam. They fundamentally renovated the Chapel of the 3 Hierarchs, which was built on the site of an original Catholic monastery that had been built by Varlaam. They also built the central church, honoring 3 bishops in the Athonite type, meaning a cross in square shape with a dome and choirs. It included a spacious isonarthex, surrounded by a dome as well. The church, called the Catholicon, was built in 1541 to 1542 and was decorated in 1548, while the isonarthex was decorated in 1566. Their community consisted of about 35 monks who assisted in the rebuilding project. Monks and materials were hoisted up the cliff by hand in a rope net. The collecting and transportation of the materials took 22 years, but the building only took 20 days. There are plenty of outdoor areas where filming and photography is allowed, which is how I was able to take the amount of footage that I have here. Even the narthex of the nave can be filmed and photographed, which shows some of the 16th century artwork, frescoes, and detailed paintings. Beyond the narthex and into the nave, filming and photography is strictly prohibited due to the age and condition of the extremely fragile frescoes. The primary church painting was done in 3 phases. The first phase took place in 1548, when the nave of the Chapel of All Saints was painted according to an inscription on the south wall. The painter's name is not referred to, but the technique, colors, movement, and arrangement of the figures and scenes, and the general style features of the frescoes lead scholars to believe the paintings to be the work of Franco Catalanos. 18 years later, in 1566, The light was painted by brothers George and Franco Candaris. The last phase of the decoration was from 1780 to 1782, as evidenced by the inscription in the northwestern pillar over the representation of the Virgin Mary, which probably refers to a minor intervention which visible elements are indistinguishable. This last phase is part of the period during which the monastery continued to flourish, organized bibliographic library, and received generous donations from the rulers of a geographical region in Romania. Some notable frescoes in the narthex include the depictions of Christ in glory, of the Last Judgment, and of the founders Theophanies and Nectarios. In the nave are more characteristic frescoes that depict the Virgin and Child, the Liturgy of Angels, the Crucified, the Pantocrator on the dome, and scenes of Christ's life, passions, and actions. Many depictions are of torture, beheadings, and crucifixions. The 16th century was definitely the most inhabited epoch in Varlaam's history. The presence of monks was a constant throughout the 16th century. From the early part of the 17th century and onwards into the 1960s, only a few monks remained at the monastery, with numbers dwindling and the decline of the monastery beginning. Today, the monastic community consists of only 7 monks. The old refectory is now used as a museum, while north of the church we can still see the Paraclesion of the 3 bishops built in 1627 and decorated in 1637. The 3 bishops honored by this church are St. Basil the Great, St. Gregory the Theologian, and St. John the Chrysostom. Essential for the history of the monastery was the contribution of Brother Christopher during the 18th century when he ranked valuable archives and copied a number of historical texts. From the early part of the 19th century, access to the monastery was improved when steps were carved into the rock with a bridge between them. These were subsequently altered many times over. Nowadays, objects are hoisted up electrically. A large 16th century oak barrel is on display that was used for centuries to store water. When the founders first ascended the rock, there was no water supply. Construction of 3 water tanks took 18 years of hard work. This barrel has the capacity to hold 12 tons of rainwater, and they were able to store enough to have surplus water for irrigation. There is a rich and important collection of about 300 manuscripts inside the monastery, some of which are on display in the sacristy and others which are kept in special places for preservation and protection. The manuscripts are multicolored, designed to attract attention, and there are also some miniatures. The first letter of every text and a lot of the titles are intricately decorated. There are handwritten liturgical pamphlets, the Acts of the Apostles, pamphlets about Byzantine music, texts written by the Fathers of the Church, and religious services. Many other ecclesiastical relics can be found in this monastery, including some post-Byzantine icons, such as embroidery with gold epitaphs and sacerdotal vestments, and also various kinds of miniatures and silverware. In the 16th century, the monastery included an organized workroom where things were embroidered with gold. Many works that can be found in several other Greek monasteries were made here. Varlaam has preserved the tower with the old pulley system, which monks used to bring up people and provisions in nets. This monastery contributes decisively to the preservation of the Orthodox tradition and Byzantine civilization. Several works are preserved, exhibited, and kept in specially renovated spaces, in showcases, and under appropriate conditions of temperature and humidity. An example of preservation is a valuable Byzantine portable icon, the one on display. On the one side is the crucifixion of Christ, dating back to the 14th century. On the other side is the Assumption of the Virgin, painted in the 16th century by Theophanes. This work was donated by the Emperor of Byzantium and his wife and children. This holy relic belongs to the Formation of the Virgin Church in Kalampaka. In recent years, it has been stolen twice. Fortunately, it was found, but it was divided into two icons. Today it is kept in the monastery of Varlaam for safety reasons. A lot of relics of saints that give off a sweet smell are kept as valuable treasures of the Orthodox in the sanctuary of the All Saints Church. There are the skulls of the holy founders and neo-martyr Nicholas from Metsovo, and pieces of the relic of Saint Chrysostom, John the Baptist, Saint Paraskevi, and Saint Anastasia. The Monastery of Varlaam has recently opened a brand new museum showcasing the excellence of religious painted icons, relics, art, and manuscripts, mostly contemporary to the Renaissance period from the 14th through 17th centuries, as well as holy vestments of the priests from the Byzantine period from 330 to 1453. No video or photography was allowed of these holy relics, so that's why I do not have any footage of them. Today, the Monastery of Varlaam can be accessed via the main road and entered for the admission fee of €3 per person. Summertime hours are 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. every day of the week except for Fridays when it is closed to the public. In the wintertime, it is open from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. and is closed on Thursdays and Fridays. There is a strict dress code which includes no sleeveless tops, pants below the knee for men, and long, loose dresses for women. Cover-ups are available for purchase at the entrance office if attire does not pass muster. Interestingly enough, eating meat is forbidden inside the monastery. There are 195 steps to enter the actual monastery after the admission office. Every now and then, a monk sits in the garden and starts conversations with the visitors. Well, that wraps up everything I know about the Varlaam Monastery in Meteora, Greece. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.